My younger sister stood up at my parents' 30th anniversary dinner and announced to the entire table, including my boss, that I was the one who always shows up broke and disappears when things get hard. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just set down my fork, very slowly, and watched the man sitting 2 seats to her left go completely still. She didn't recognize him. That was the thing. She had no idea who he was. But I did. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context. And context is something my family has always been very selective about sharing. My name is Laurel. I'm 31 years old. I work as a freelance financial consultant, which, for most of my 20s, my family translated as unemployed but too proud to admit it. My younger sister, Becca, is 28, works in marketing at a mid-sized agency downtown, drives a white Audi she absolutely cannot afford, and has been the golden child of our household since approximately the day she was born. I am not exaggerating that last part. My mother used to introduce us at church as Becca, our sunshine, and Laurel, our other one. She'd laugh when she said it, like it was a joke. I learned very young that it wasn't. Our parents' anniversary dinner had been Becca's idea, which should have been my first warning. Anytime Becca organized something, it was because she needed an audience. She'd booked a private room at a restaurant in the city, the kind with cloth napkins and a tasting menu and a sommelier who introduces himself by name. It sat 12 people comfortably. She'd invited 14. She'd also, without telling me, invited my boss. His name is Hugh Mercer. He runs a boutique consulting firm that specializes in mid-market business restructuring, and about 8 months before that dinner, I had landed a contract with his company. The biggest of my career. It had taken me 2 years of cold outreach referrals and one very well-timed conference introduction to get in front of him. We'd been working together for 4 months at that point, and it was going well. Very well. He'd started looping me into client calls I wasn't originally scoped for. Becca knew I worked with him. She didn't know the details. I'd mentioned his firm once in passing at Christmas, but somehow she tracked him down, decided he was important enough to impress, and added him to the dinner list without asking me. She told my mother he was one of Laurel's old colleagues from when she used to have a real job. My mother relayed this to my aunt, who told my cousin, who mentioned it to me an hour before we sat down to eat. I almost left right then. I should have, but my father had called me the week before and said, "Laurel, please come. For us. Your mother really wants the whole family there." And because I have spent 31 years being unable to say no to that man when he uses that particular tone of voice, I stayed. I wore my good blazer. I ordered sparkling water instead of wine so I'd stay sharp. I sat at the far end of the table, next to my aunt and across from my cousin Marcus. Not the cousin from the list. A different one. We have several. And I told myself it would be fine. Hugh was seated near the center of the table, between my mother and someone I didn't recognize from Becca's work. He'd arrived before me, which meant Becca had gotten to him first. When I walked in and saw him there, he gave me a small nod and a look I couldn't quite read. The first hour was fine. Appetizers, bread, the kind of surface-level family conversation that sounds warm and means nothing. My father told a story about their honeymoon that everyone had heard 15 times. My mother cried at the right moment. Becca sat at the center of the table, glowing like she'd arranged the whole universe. It was during the main course that things shifted. My mother, in that tone she uses when she's decided to be real, started talking about how proud she was of Becca. Becca's promotion, Becca's apartment, Becca's car, Becca's boyfriend, who wasn't there but was apparently very successful and very handsome and very much everything a mother could want in a future son-in-law. The table nodded along. I ate my salmon and said nothing. Then my mother said, "And we're just so grateful she's always been the responsible one, the one we could count on." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. But Becca did. Becca looked directly at me, smiled the way she smiled at me since we were children. That particular smile that is technically a smile, but is actually a dare, and said, "Well, not everyone takes that path, right, Mom? Some of us are still figuring it out." There was polite laughter from a few people who didn't know better. Then Becca looked down the table at Hugh and said brightly, like she was being charming, "Hugh, right? I actually invited you tonight partly because I thought it would be nice for you to meet the whole family. Laurel's always been a little," she tilted her head, "the wild card. The one who shows up broke and needs bailing out. I'm sure you know the type." The table went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their food. I felt my face go still. I trained myself over years of family dinners and holidays and conversations like this one to go very still when something lands. It's not composure exactly. It's more like my body deciding that if it doesn't move, maybe time will stop. My mother added in a voice meant to soften it but didn't. We love Laurel. She's just always been our free spirit. My father said nothing. He looked at his plate. And Hugh set down his wine glass very carefully and said, I'm sorry, can I ask, are you talking about Laurel? He gestured toward me. This Laurel? Becca blinked. Yes, she's my sister. I know, Hugh said. He had this way of speaking. Very measured, very calm, the way people speak when they've decided to say something important and want every word to land correctly. I wasn't sure because the Laurel I know restructured a supply chain operation for one of our clients last quarter and saved them about $2.3 million. She's the reason we retained that account. He paused. I actually flew out to meet her specifically because I wanted her on our permanent team. The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. Becca's smile stayed on her face, but it had become a thing apart from her. Like a hat left on after the wind had already blown everything else away. My mother said, Oh, just that. Oh. I looked at Hugh. He looked at me. He raised an eyebrow just slightly, the way he does in meetings when a client says something that's technically their own problem, but about to become everyone's problem. I picked up my fork and finished my salmon. But that moment, as satisfying as it was to watch play out in real time, was not the end of anything. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect these stories to end at the dinner table. Someone says the right thing, everyone recalibrates, the credits roll. That is not how families work. What actually happened after dinner is that Becca pulled me into the hallway outside the restrooms and told me I had embarrassed her by bringing my work stuff into a personal event. I stared at her for a long moment. She had invited my boss. She had made the comment. She was now upset that the outcome had not gone the way she planned. I said, Becca, I need you to hear something. My voice was quieter than I expected. I have been helping this family for 6 years. Quietly, without asking for anything back. She started to say something. I kept going. When you needed first and last month's rent on that apartment 4 years ago, who do you think sent Mom the money she lent you? I watched her face shift. When Dad had that gap between insurance payments after his surgery and they were going to defer the procedure, who covered it? It wasn't Grandma's savings account. That was gone by then. She stared at me. $11,000, I said. Over 3 years. And I never said a word about it because I didn't think it needed to be a transaction. Because you're my family. I let that sit for a second. And tonight you stood up at dinner and told my boss that I show up broke. Her mouth opened, closed. I'm not angry, I said, and I was surprised to realize I mostly meant it. I'm just done pretending it's okay. I walked back into the dining room. I said goodbye to my parents, thanked them for dinner, congratulated them on 30 years. I hugged my aunt. I shook Hugh's hand and told him I'd see him Monday. I drove home alone and sat in my car in the parking garage for a while before going inside. I want to talk about the money, because I think it's important and because I've spent a long time not talking about it. My family's financial situation has always been complicated in the way that a lot of American middle-class families are complicated, which is to say, from the outside it looked fine, and from the inside it was held together with optimism and avoidance. My parents owned a house. They had retirement accounts. They had credit card debt they never quite paid off, and a habit of solving short-term problems by not looking at them directly. When I was 23, I started doing freelance bookkeeping on the side of my day job. By 25, I'd built up enough of a client base that I could consult full-time. It took years of very lean living. I drove a 10-year-old Honda. I didn't take vacations. I meal prepped on Sundays and brought lunch every day. But by the time I was 28, I was making more than anyone in my family knew, because I had never told them. I hadn't told them because I'd watched what happened when Becca had money. It became everyone's money. My parents treated her credit cards like a shared resource they were all contributing to. When she got a raise, my mother called it good news for all of us. I had learned, watching this, that in my family financial success was communal, and financial success was communal, and financial struggle was personal. So I kept mine private. But I helped. I helped because they were my parents and because I could, and because even when I was frustrated and resentful and sitting in my car after holiday dinners running through the litany of small humiliations, I still loved them in that exhausting way you love people who formed you even when they made you feel small. The $11,000 I'd mentioned to Becca wasn't everything. There were smaller things. Groceries when my mom's checking account was low, a car repair for my dad, a medical copay here and there. None of it was ever acknowledged. Not because my parents were cruel, but because acknowledging it would have required them to see something about the family dynamic they had built. And that was harder. What nobody knew, what I had not told anyone except my accountant, was that 3 months before that anniversary dinner, my parents had come to me privately and asked for help with something bigger. My dad's pension had taken a hit. They were looking at a shortfall in their retirement projections that genuinely scared them. My mother had cried. My father, who never asks for anything directly, had asked directly. I gave them $22,000. It was most of what I had in a liquid savings account I'd been building for 2 years. I did not tell Becca. I did not tell anyone. My parents asked me not to because they didn't want to make it weird with your sister. And I had agreed because I understood what they were afraid of. 3 months later, Becca stood at a dinner my parents attended and told my boss I was the one who showed up broke. My parents said nothing. I didn't hear from Becca for 11 days after the dinner. Then she texted, "Sorry if things got weird. I was just joking around." I read it twice, typed and deleted several responses. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to the proposal I was drafting for Hugh's team. Hugh had, in fact, offered me a full-time position the Monday after the dinner. It came with a salary that was nearly double my average freelance income, benefits, an office in the building downtown, and the title of Senior Restructuring Analyst. He'd been planning to make the offer for a few weeks, he said. The dinner had accelerated the timeline. "I wanted to see how you handled yourself," he said, which sounds odd out of context but made sense coming from him. He runs a firm where the work is often done in rooms with difficult people, and composure is not optional. "I mostly just ate my salmon," I said. He laughed. "That's exactly what I mean. I took the job." I also, around this time, had a conversation with my parents that I'd been putting off for a long time. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning. My mother made coffee. My father sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded the way he does when he knows something hard is coming. I sat down across from them, and I said, "I need to tell you some things, and I need you to actually hear them." I told them about the 11,000. I told them about the 22,000. I told them about the groceries and the co-pays and the car repair and all of it, laid out plainly, not as an accusation, but as information. I needed them to understand the reality of what had been happening. My mother cried. My father looked at the table. Then I told him what had hurt more than the money. I told him about the introduction at church. I told him about our other one. I told him about standing in the hallway at Thanksgiving when I was 19 and listening to my mother tell a neighbor that Becca was going to do something with her life. I told him things I'd been carrying for a decade and had convinced myself weren't worth saying. It took almost 2 hours. My mother cried more than once. My father apologized in the particular way of men who are genuinely sorry but not sure what to do with that, quietly, with long pauses, looking at the wall. At the end, my mother asked if I was going to stop talking to them. I said, no, but things have to be different. I can't keep being treated like I don't exist, and also be the person everyone calls when there's a problem. She nodded. She didn't say much. I think she was processing. I drove home and cried in my car again. Different kind of crying, though. The kind that feels like something releasing rather than something breaking. Becca and I did not speak for almost 3 months after that. What I found out later, through my cousin, who finds out everything eventually, was that about 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Becca had gone to our parents and asked for money to help cover a shortfall on her car payments. She'd overextended herself. The Audi was more than she could manage. My parents told her they didn't have it to give. She pushed back. They held firm. It was, apparently, the first time in Becca's adult life that my parents had said no to her about money. She did not take it well. She called my mother 3 times in one day. There was a long, uncomfortable conversation about financial responsibility that my cousin described with some relish as very long overdue. I don't know what exactly was said. I wasn't there. but something shifted in my parents after that. When my mother called me a few weeks later, not about anything practical, just to talk, she mentioned, unprompted, that she'd been thinking about how much I'd done for the family over the years. She said, "I don't think we ever really showed you that we saw it." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a scene. It was just a sentence, offered carefully in the middle of an ordinary phone call. I said, "Thank you, Mom," and I meant it. Becca eventually reached out again. We got coffee on a neutral Tuesday afternoon at a place neither of us had strong feelings about. She looked different, not physically, exactly, but in the way people look when they've had to sit with something uncomfortable for long enough that it started to change them. She said, "I said something really unfair at dinner." "You did. I think I'd been telling myself the story about you for a long time that wasn't true." She wrapped both hands around her cup, about who was struggling and who wasn't, about who needed help and who was giving it. I asked her why she thought she'd done that. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think if I admitted you were doing well, I had to admit that I've been watching it happen and doing nothing. And it was easier to just decide you weren't." That was the most honest thing my sister had ever said to me. I didn't expect it, and I didn't know what to do with it at first. I just sat there looking at her. We are not close, Becca and I. I don't think we ever will be in the way some sisters are. The texting every day, the finishing each other's sentences kind of close. There is too much history, and I am too old to pretend it doesn't exist. But we are in contact. We can sit in the same room. At her parents' last birthday dinner, she introduced me to someone from her office and said, "This is my sister Laurel. She's in corporate consulting. She's really good at what she does." A small thing, but I know what it cost her to say it. The job with Hugh's firm has been the best professional decision I've made. I've been there almost a year now. I have an office with a window. I have colleagues who ask for my opinion and then actually use it. I have a salary that makes the Honda feel less like a sacrifice and more like a choice. My parents call more than they used to. My father has started asking about my work. Actually asking, not just being polite before pivoting to Becca. My mother sent me flowers on my work anniversary, which she has never done for anything in my life before, and which made me cry in the elevator on the way up to my floor. I called her back and told her they were beautiful. They were. There is no version of the story where everything became perfect. Families don't work that way, and I've made peace with that. What I have instead is something more durable than perfect. I have a life that is genuinely mine, work I am proud of, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the people who once used my silence against me have had to reckon, slowly, with what that silence was actually covering. The night of the anniversary dinner, when Hugh said what he said and the table went quiet, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired mostly. Tired of the years of it, tired of the careful management of other people's perceptions of me, tired of being the family's best-kept secret, but I also felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely visible. And it turned out that was enough. I used to think that doing the right thing quietly was enough. That if I paid the bills no one asked about, covered the gaps no one acknowledged, and said nothing when I was misrepresented, the truth would eventually take care of itself. For a long time, I believed that patience was the same thing as dignity. I don't believe that anymore. Not exactly. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it, the dinner, the hallway conversation with my sister, the 2 hours at my parents' kitchen table, is that there's a difference between quiet strength and quiet disappearance. I had confused the two for most of my 20s. I told myself I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was making it very easy for everyone around me to keep not seeing me. The $22,000 I gave my parents 3 months before that dinner didn't come from weakness. Neither did the $11,000 before that, or the smaller things over the years. Those choices came from a real place. Love, obligation, genuine care. That part I don't regret. What I regret is the silence around them, the decision to help and then disappear, to contribute and then make myself small, to be essential and then accept being treated as unnecessary. That was not strength. That was a habit I had dressed up as virtue. Hugh didn't stand up for me because I was lucky. He said what he said because I had spent 4 months doing work that was impossible to misrepresent. Numbers don't have feelings. Restructuring outcomes don't care who your family thinks you are. The results I'd built were the only thing in that room that night that nobody could reframe, and they were there because I had put in the years. The lean ones, the uncertain ones. The uncertain ones, the ones where I drove the old car and packed my lunch and did not tell anyone how hard I was working or why. That's the part that took me a long time to understand. Integrity isn't about being seen. It's about building something real enough that when the moment comes, there's nothing to argue with. My sister could say what she said because she had never looked closely enough at my life to know what was actually in it. That was partly her failure, but it was also partly mine. I had kept the door closed. After the dinner, I opened it. Not all at once, not to everyone, but I stopped hiding my competence like it was something to be embarrassed about. I stopped shrinking in rooms where I'd earned the right to take up space, and I started saying plainly and without apology what I had done and what I was capable of, not to impress anyone, but because the truth is not something you should have to smuggle in through a back door. Becca said something to me at coffee that I've thought about often since. She said she'd told herself a story about me for years because it was easier than admitting she'd watched me struggle and done nothing. I think a lot of people do that, build a version of you that lets them off the hook. The only defense against it is a life that's too clearly lived to be easily rewritten. I'm still working on that. I think I will be for a while. But I'm working on it out loud now, and that makes all the difference.